wanted to begin our project by asking members of the W&L student body how they would define poverty.
I would define poverty as the inaccessibility to things that provide you with livable conditions and standards, and not being able to support yourself and have access to things that help you in life.
I would define poverty as a lack of assets or resources that can improve someone's quality of life.
To me, poverty is having a lack of something, whether it be food, money, resources, housing.
I would define poverty as having a household income that falls below the middle poverty line.
I would define poverty as living uncomfortably, or living paycheck to paycheck, or just struggling to live and put food on the table.
We believe that poverty should be defined with a consideration that involves more factors than just monetary measurements, and these factors should change based upon the area and household size. In short, we believe that poverty is the lack of resources that are substantial enough to cause insecurity.
With this thesis in mind, what is the best way then to measure poverty? A strong approach to measuring poverty that considers a variety of factors which contribute to insecurity of resources is the capabilities approach. This approach is a theoretical framework on poverty with two specific claims. The first being it is primarily morally important to have the freedom to achieve well-being. The second claim being the measure of this well-being is understood in terms of people's capabilities and functionings, also known as their substantial freedoms. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines capabilities as the doings and beings that people can achieve if they so choose, whereas functioning is the active realization of one or more capabilities. It is important to note the capabilities approach emphasizes an individual person's substantial freedoms necessary to a life of quality. There are many benefits to the capabilities approach. The framework in itself assesses more than just a household's income. Instead, it completes a full assessment of an individual's well-being. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy states that the capability approach prioritizes certain of people's beings and doings and their opportunities to realize those beings and doings, such as their genuine opportunities to be educated, their ability to move around, or to enjoy supportive social relationships, all of which is necessary in understanding someone's quality of life. So the approach in itself is an account of justice. The capabilities approach emphasizes the importance of an individual's substantial freedoms and the opportunity to achieve a fulfilling life. Muslim stresses creating conditions where everyone has equal opportunities to develop and realize their actual capabilities.
The negatives to the capabilities approach. The main argument made against this approach is that it is difficult to measure. While it might be easy to sit down and define capabilities from afar, it is very difficult once it comes down to measuring them. The main argument of this approach is that you cannot fully and accurately measure one's ability to perform a task, as people have good days and bad days. Some have argued that this approach is hard to set a global standard baseline, because every country is different in its development and its citizens. When setting a poverty line, the goal of setting it would be to one day have 0% poverty below that line. But with this approach, there will always be someone in a nation that is developing slower than another, that is not capable of the same things as someone else, so they would not ever be equal.
Martha Nussbaum's, an American philosopher's primary concern is the social and ethical dimension of human development, which includes the conditions and equal opportunities one has to reach their full potential. Nussbaum capabilities approach is a list of 10 central capabilities that a decent political order must secure to all citizens. The reports of the status of these capabilities are used as a comparative measure. The capabilities themselves are substantial freedoms or opportunities created by a combination of personal abilities and the environment. Nussbaum uses the list along with the capabilities approach to define what she deems the central capabilities. She then determines the capabilities of the area being measured from that list and how best to help the people. Nussbaum's approach supports our thesis because it considers factors other than monetary that contribute to a life of quality or insecurity. The relationships between capabilities and functionings is necessary for understanding this approach. Capabilities mentioned earlier are the doings and beings one is able to do. The functionings are the active realization of one or more capabilities. The functionings are the observed variable. Here are two examples of this relationship provided by the Standard Encyclopedia of Philosophy. One brand of washing liquid was shown to have a positive or negative effect on health. Then it would be relevant for a capabilitarian conceptualization of health to include the capability to choose between different brands of washing liquid. The functioning would be actually choosing and buying one of the washing liquids. Another example applies to voting. Someone might have the real freedom to vote, which is the capability, but chooses not to do so and thus does not have the function of voting, the functioning. Robert Rector, a senior research fellow at the Center for Health and Welfare Policy, provides an argument for what poverty looks like in America. Rector presents the argument that the average poor person, as defined by the government, has a living standard far higher than the public imagines. By this he means the U.S. government has misconstrued the idea that all impoverished families in the U.S. do not live a normal lifestyle. He makes the claim that the government poverty statistics do not reflect the true well-being of these individuals, and the public perception of poverty within the U.S. is misconstrued by only focusing on income rather than considering quality of life. He emphasizes the fact that people who are classified as living in poverty have access to modern appliances like AC, cable TV, etc., and that poverty is different than deprivation. Rector's argument considers a lifestyle rather than just monetary status, which supports our thesis.
Rector's argument shows different perspectives of what poverty looks like and gives Americans a better view as to how poverty is not just homelessness and starvation. He paints a picture that shows the modern-day views of poverty and how many Americans have air conditioning as well as many other resources even though they are living below the poverty line. To quote, he says, "Poor families certainly struggle to make ends meet, but in most cases they are struggling to pay for air conditioning and the cable TV bill, as well as to put food on the table. Their living standards are far different from the images of dire deprivation promoted by activists and the mainstream media." Now the cons of Rector's argument. The main problem associated with Rector's argument is that he paints poor American households in a way that makes it seem as though they're hardly struggling. Rector makes it seem as though poor households have everything that they could ever need, when they are still struggling although they have amenities. To quote Rector, he wrote, "The home of a typical poor family was not overcrowded and was in good repair. In fact, the typical poor American had more living space than the average European. The typical poor American family was also able to obtain medical care when needed. By its own report, the typical family was not hungry and had sufficient funds during the past year to meet all essential needs." This view that Rector paints makes it seem as though poor families are living in luxury, when in fact he does not display the tragic choice that is made between these families when it comes down to working long hours or spending time with their children, or many of the other choices that poor families are forced to make day to day.
In today's age, many people consider artificial intelligence to be one of the smartest things on the globe. So what was its response when asked, how do you define poverty and how is it best measured?
Poverty is typically defined as the condition in which individuals or families lack the financial resources to meet basic needs such as food, shelter, and clothing. However, definitions of poverty can vary based on context and perspective. Each method has its strengths and limitations. Often a combination of these measures provides a more comprehensive view of poverty. The choice of measurement can depend on the context, such as the goals of the assessment, the ability of the data, and the specific aspects of poverty that are most relevant to the analysis. This shows that not even AI can give a definite definition of poverty. With all of this information in mind, and our definition, poverty is the lack of resources that are substantial enough to cause insecurity, we believe that the best way to measure poverty is the capabilities approach. Yes, it can be difficult to measure, but once it is measured, it takes into account all things that cause insecurity, not just monetary resources. However, many people make the counter-argument by saying that poverty should only refer to physical measurements because all resources necessary for the quality of life come down to money, and those that don't shouldn't be considered as poverty. They also say that the cost of living is easier to measure compared to the capabilities associated with the capabilities approach. Although measuring the cost of living is quote-unquote easier compared to the capabilities approach, poverty should consider more than just money because a true quality of life involves factors beyond monetary measures. While fiscal measurements provide a clear framework for assessing poverty, limiting the definition of poverty to monetary factors fails to capture the complexity of human experience. Individuals may have adequate income but lack vital capabilities like access to education, support networks, community engagement that highly contributes to an individual's development and opportunities. Fiscal measurements also often fail to consider inflation and an individual's circumstances, all in which lead to an inaccurate assessment of poverty. Also, concepts like social exclusion exist, where someone is excluded from opportunities due to the fact that they're seen as different from others. This puts that individual at a disadvantage to achieve a resource or a capability. That is why we choose the capabilities approach, because although it is difficult and although some people think that poverty should just relate to money because they believe everything comes down to money in some way or another, it shows that social concepts aren't considered in this approach, and we need to consider the psychology of humans and how that may affect those living in poverty as well. And other approaches don't fully consider that. In conclusion, the definition of poverty is a controversial point with many opinions attached to it. However, we believe it is defined as the lack of resources that are substantial enough to cause insecurity. Poverty is due to a lack of central capabilities. And in order to measure this, we strongly believe in the capabilities approach because it emphasizes an individual person's substantial freedoms necessary to a quality of life that everyone would want for themselves.